The moment I saw that photo, my world felt like it stopped. Everything I thought I knew vanished. It wasn't just an image, it was a moment frozen in time that revealed truths I wasn't ready to face. I held it in my hands, trembling slightly, unsure if I wanted to look again or turn away forever. I remember the day clearly. The sky was gray, the kind of overcast that makes the house feel smaller, quieter. I was going through old boxes in the attic, hoping to find something, anything that connected me to the past. It was a simple task, something I had done hundreds of times before, but this time, it wasn't about nostalgia. It wasn't about memory. It was about closure. The photo was tucked between worn letters, the edges curled from age. I didn't recognize it at first. The lighting was dim, the faces partially hidden, but then, I saw him, and my heart sank. It was a version of him I had never known, or maybe I had refused to see. And there, in that single frame, was the evidence of choices, of secrets, of betrayal. I couldn't breathe for a moment. I sat down on the wooden floor, the dust rising around me in small clouds. My hands shook as I tried to make sense of it. Questions tumbled through my mind like stones. How could he? Why didn't I see this sooner? And the hardest one of all, could I ever forgive him? I traced the lines of the photograph with my finger, as if touching it could rewrite the story. But the truth was stubborn. It stared back at me, unchanging and undeniable. And in that silence, I felt something shift inside, a mixture of hurt, anger, and an ache that reached far deeper than I expected. I knew then that life would not be the same. This photo was not just a memory. It was a turning point. It marked the moment where the past collided with the present, forcing me to confront feelings I had buried for years. And even before I fully understood it, I realized that forgiveness was no longer a simple choice. It would have to be earned, if it ever came at all. That day, in the quiet of the attic, surrounded by the remnants of our lives, I made a silent promise to myself. I would face what had been hidden. I would confront the truth, no matter how painful. And I would tell this story, because some moments like the one captured in that photograph deserve to be remembered, felt, and understood. The photograph haunted me for days. I couldn't stop thinking about it, even while going about my usual routines. Breakfast felt tasteless, the morning light too bright, as if it were accusing me of ignoring what I had long suspected but never admitted. I kept returning to the image in my mind, trying to piece together what it meant, and why I hadn't noticed the signs earlier. I decided to sit down and write, not a letter to him, he would never see it, but a letter to myself. I wanted to untangle my thoughts, to give the chaos inside me some order. I described the room where I found the photo, the way the dust motes floated in the sunlight, the faint scent of old paper and memory. I wrote about the faces in the photograph, the expressions frozen in time, and the questions I couldn't yet answer. Writing brought a small comfort, a sense that even if I couldn't control what had happened, I could at least try to understand it. I thought about the years we had spent together. Our relationship had been simple once. We shared laughter, quiet moments, and even small disagreements that never lingered too long. I remembered birthdays, anniversaries, and Sunday dinners filled with warmth and the aroma of home-cooked meals. It had all seemed so ordinary, so safe, and yet, beneath the ordinary, there had been cracks I never wanted to see. Now, the photo revealed them all at once, and I had no choice but to acknowledge them. I recalled the first time I had trusted him completely. It was years ago, during a time when life felt uncertain, and I had leaned on him for guidance, for support. He had always appeared dependable, kind, and patient. And yet, that photograph made me realize that I had been blind to some of the choices he made, choices that affected not just me, but everyone around us. The weight of that knowledge pressed on my chest. In the evenings, I would sit alone by the window, the rain tapping softly against the glass, thinking about how fragile trust could be, how one single moment, captured in an image, could unravel years of shared memories. I realized that love and betrayal often exist side by side, quietly, until something reveals the truth and forces them into the light. The photograph had done exactly that. I began talking to friends, cautiously, in small fragments. I didn't tell them the whole story at once. Instead, I shared feelings: confusion, hurt, disbelief. And as I spoke, I noticed something unexpected, even in my silence about the details. The act of speaking, of confessing my emotions, brought a kind of relief. The tension in my chest loosened slightly, and I began to see that this journey was not just about him. It was about me, about how I would process betrayal, and how I would decide whether forgiveness was even possible. Family memories surfaced too, vivid and bittersweet. I remembered the summers spent at my grandmother's house, where he had been part of our circle in ways that seemed so natural at the time. He had laughed at our childish antics, offered advice that seemed small then but mattered deeply later, and promised to always be there. And now, I wondered how all those moments could coexist with what I had discovered. Could someone who had been kind, present, and supportive also make choices that hurt me so profoundly? The question lingered, unanswered. I went back to the photograph often. I examined every detail, the angle, the background, the subtle expressions. Each time, I felt a new wave of emotion: sadness, anger, disbelief, and even a strange, reluctant empathy. I began to notice patterns, hints of intention, moments of vulnerability that made the image even more complex. It wasn't simply proof of betrayal. It was a story, frozen in a single frame, that demanded to be understood. During this time, I avoided confrontation. I wasn't ready. I wasn't sure if I could handle the conversation without my voice trembling, without tears falling uncontrollably. So I focused on myself. I meditated, I wrote, I walked in the quiet of the park, letting the wind carry away the edges of my anger, allowing clarity to seep in slowly. I realized that before I could face him, I had to face my own emotions, confront my own expectations, and accept that life is rarely as simple as we want it to be. Small moments of reflection also revealed the subtler betrayals I hadn't noticed before. Times when words didn't match actions, promises made but quietly broken, trust given but taken for granted. The photograph had opened a door to memories I had pushed aside, reminders of how complicated human relationships can be. I understood that my feelings weren't just about one moment, they were about patterns, history, and the cumulative effect of choices over years. And yet, even as I wrestled with these feelings, I remembered the moments of joy, the laughter, and the shared experiences that had once defined us. I realized that no single photograph, no single act of betrayal, could erase the entirety of what had existed. There was love beneath it all, even if it was buried under disappointment and hurt. That realization gave me a small, fragile hope that reconciliation might be possible, even if forgiveness seemed impossible right now. By the end of that first week, I had made a decision. I would confront him, but on my terms, not out of anger, not out of desire for revenge, but to seek understanding, to demand honesty, and to give myself the chance to finally process what had happened. I wanted clarity before closure. And most importantly, I wanted to preserve myself, my dignity, my emotions, and my right to feel deeply and honestly about what I had discovered. The days that followed were heavy with a quiet unease. I tried to carry on with my life as usual, going to work, meeting friends, keeping up appearances, but the photograph lingered in my mind like a shadow. Every little thing reminded me of it: the way he laughed at a memory I once thought was ours alone, the way a familiar street corner felt suddenly unfamiliar. It was as though the world had shifted slightly, and I was left trying to find my footing again. I remember sitting at the kitchen table one evening, the light from the lamp, soft and warm, yet it couldn't soften the ache in my chest. The photograph lay on the counter, carefully placed, but impossible to ignore. I traced the edges with my fingers, hesitant, almost afraid of what I might see if I looked too closely. The faces in the image seemed to watch me, silently demanding answers I didn't yet have. I decided to reach out to him, though my voice was heavy with hesitation. "Can we talk?" I asked quietly over the phone. There was a pause on the other end that stretched too long. When he finally spoke, it was calm, almost nonchalant. "Of course, what's on your mind?" I hesitated, unsure how to begin. Words felt inadequate for the storm of emotions inside me. "I saw something," I said slowly, "and I don't know how to feel about it." Another pause. Then, softly, he replied, "I see. We'll talk when you're ready." The conversation ended, but the tension lingered. Each day became a delicate balance of waiting and wondering. I tried to focus on small routines to distract myself: walking in the park, making tea, reading old letters, but the photograph always returned to my thoughts. I kept replaying the moment I had found it, the quiet room, the dust motes in the sunlight, the weight of knowing something I hadn't been prepared to know. It wasn't just about betrayal. It was about trust, about shared history, about the invisible threads that bind us to one another. And now, those threads felt frayed, tenuous, almost fragile enough to snap with the slightest touch. At home, my family noticed my unease. They asked questions I couldn't answer, offered comfort I wasn't ready to accept. I smiled politely, nodded, and retreated inward, afraid that speaking too much would unravel my carefully constructed calm. Yet, even in my silence, the tension seemed to seep into every corner of my life, coloring interactions and shading moments with an underlying sadness. One evening, I found myself looking through old photographs, trying to recapture a sense of normalcy. I came across pictures of shared vacations, birthday parties, quiet afternoons in the garden. I remembered laughter, arguments that quickly passed, small kindnesses that now seemed monumental. I realized then that the photograph I had found didn't just represent betrayal, it represented the loss of innocence. The moment when I first understood that people I love are capable of imperfection, of choices that hurt, even unintentionally. I began writing again, pouring my thoughts onto paper. I described each feeling in detail: the shock, the disbelief, the sadness, the subtle anger that ebbed and flowed. Writing became a way to untangle my emotions, to give structure to the chaos, and to prepare myself for the confrontation I knew would come. I didn't write to accuse, not yet. I wrote to understand. The tension began to affect small interactions as well. Every phone call, every text, every meeting felt heavier than it should. I noticed myself reading into words and gestures, questioning intentions where none might exist. The photograph had made me hyper-aware, sensitive to nuances I had previously ignored, and the more I noticed, the more I felt the need for answers. One night, unable to sleep, I walked to the park near my home. The air was cool, the streets empty, and the soft hum of distant traffic accompanied my thoughts. I replayed memories of our shared past, trying to reconcile the warmth of those years with the cold reality the photograph revealed. I thought about conversations that now felt incomplete, moments when I had trusted blindly, and the subtle signs I had ignored. That as I sat on a bench, the rain began to fall lightly, tapping against the leaves and pavement. I welcomed the sound, the solitude, the gentle rhythm that mirrored my inner turmoil. I whispered to myself, I need to know, I need to understand, I need the truth. It was clear that the rising conflict wasn't about anger or confrontation alone. It was about processing the depth of betrayal, understanding the choices made, and deciding how to move forward. Every small decision, every cautious step, became a part of this internal struggle. I had to navigate not only my feelings toward him but also toward myself, my expectations, my trust, my willingness to forgive or let go. The days that followed were heavier still. The air between us seemed thickened with unspoken words, and even small gestures carried more weight than they ever had before. I noticed the subtle ways tension had begun to creep into our interactions. He was polite, attentive even, but there was a distance now, a barrier I hadn't seen before. It was as if we were walking on thin ice, both of us aware that a wrong step might shatter the fragile calm we were trying to maintain. Every glance, every word, seemed loaded with meaning I could not quite decipher. I wanted to ask questions, to demand explanations, but a fear kept me silent, a fear of what answers might do to the fragile, cautious truce that hung between us. I began noticing patterns, subtle changes that made my chest tighten with unease. A laugh that once had been easy, carefree, now seemed forced, clipped. A hesitation in his voice betrayed a thought he refused to speak aloud. The way he glanced at his phone with increasing frequency made me wonder if he was distracted or if he was avoiding me, or perhaps both. And always, in the quiet corners of my mind, the photograph lingered, a silent, accusing witness to everything that had shifted. It wasn't dramatic. There were no arguments, no shouting matches, no slamming doors. The escalation was quiet, almost imperceptible to an outsider. But in the small pauses, the fleeting silences, the things left unsaid, there was a heaviness that pressed down harder than any outright fight ever could. Every day, the unspoken tension grew, slowly threading itself into ordinary moments. The way he looked at me, the way I responded, the careful distance in our gestures. It was exhausting, this constant navigation of invisible lines and unseen boundaries. I tried to find refuge in the ordinary, in the routines of home life. I cooked meals slowly, savoring the rhythm of chopping and stirring, letting the smells and textures absorb my attention. The simple act of peeling vegetables or kneading dough became a meditation, a way to channel my thoughts without confronting them directly. I walked through the garden often, noticing the subtle shifts in the seasons. I watched the blooms open in early morning light, listened to the rustle of leaves in the wind, and felt the sun warm my face. Life continued around me, carrying on in its quiet persistence. And yet, even in these small comforts, my mind would return to the photograph. Every time I saw it in my memory, the image felt sharper, more precise, the sense of betrayal deeper, gnawing at the edges of the calm I tried to maintain. Journaling became my quiet refuge, a space where I could untangle the knots of emotion without fear or judgment. I wrote about our years together, the moments we had shared, the milestones and small joys that now seemed tinged with shadows. I wrote of the disbelief, the confusion, and the hurt, laying bare my feelings in ink when I could not voice them aloud. I did not write to accuse him or to inflame tension. I wrote to understand myself, to give shape to the swirling emotions that had become difficult to navigate. In those pages, I could confront my fears and my pain, and perhaps, in time, find a way to make sense of them. One afternoon, I tried a small gesture toward normalcy. I asked about a memory, hoping to bridge the growing distance. "Do you remember our trip to the lake?" I asked softly, trying to invoke warmth, to find a foothold in shared history. He paused, his expression guarded. For a moment, I thought he might respond with the warmth and openness that had once come so naturally, but instead, he gave a small nod, a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I remember," he said quietly, and that simplicity, that lack of depth, reminded me starkly of how much distance had grown between us. What had once been effortless laughter, teasing, spontaneous stories was now fraught with caution. Every interaction carried the weight of unspoken questions, of potential misunderstanding, of fragile emotion held in check. It became painfully clear that before we could repair anything, we needed to confront the truth that the photograph had revealed. The image was not just a piece of paper. It was a symbol, a marker of everything that had been hidden, postponed, or avoided. Avoidance no longer protected either of us. The photograph had become a challenge, yes, but also an opportunity to speak honestly, to explore whether trust could be rebuilt, and to decide whether the bond between us could survive the cracks that had appeared. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, as shadows from the streetlight outside danced across the walls. My thoughts spiraled around the photograph, around the choices it represented, the secrets it exposed, and the quiet distance that had crept into our relationship. I thought about how easily small lies, omissions, or fears can grow into walls between people who care deeply for each other. I understood, with a bitter clarity, that the only way forward was through confrontation. Not angry confrontation, but an honest, deliberate acknowledgement of what had been hidden. I remember the first time I attempted to bring it up directly. We sat in the living room, the soft hum of the heater filling the stillness. I felt my heart beat in my chest as I spoke, my voice low and careful, tentative yet determined. "We need to talk about it," I said, trying to anchor myself in the steadiness of my tone. He looked at me, hesitation flickering in his eyes. "About the photograph?" he asked, his voice wary but open. "Yes," I said, steadying my breathing. "I can't move forward until I understand. I need to hear it from you." He nodded slowly, inhaling deeply as if bracing himself for something difficult. For a long moment, we sat in silence, the weight of the moment pressing in from all sides. Neither of us spoke, yet we were both acutely aware of the significance of that quiet pause. This was not an argument. It was not confrontation in the sense of anger or accusation. It was something quieter, more profound, a recognition that the truth had to be spoken, and that avoiding it any longer would only allow the distance between us to grow. I could feel the tension coil around my chest, tight and unyielding, but mingled with that tension was a strange, grounding clarity. The rising conflict, the quiet unease that had threaded itself into our daily lives, had brought me to a point where honesty was not just necessary, it was inevitable. There was no turning back. The photograph, with all its implications and all the silence it had produced, demanded acknowledgement. That evening, I reflected on what this quiet escalation had taught me. Trust, once broken, is fragile in ways that are invisible to the outside world. It is not a thing that can be repaired with words alone. It requires patience, reflection, courage, and repeated acts of honesty. The photograph had been a painful catalyst, yes, but it had also been illuminating. It had shown me the fragility of relationships, the importance of communication, and the human capacity for error and redemption. It was a lesson I had to confront fully. I realized that my anger, my confusion, and even my sadness were not obstacles to resolution. They were signposts, indicators of what mattered most, what needed to be addressed. I needed to embrace the discomfort of truth, to face the emotions it evoked, and to make space for the difficult conversations that would inevitably follow. The rising conflict, though quiet, had been relentless. It had seeped into every interaction, every glance, every shared meal, and had forced me to examine not just his choices, but my own responses, my own fears, my own contributions to the widening distance. And in that reflection, I found a measure of clarity. The photograph had not simply caused conflict, it had revealed the truth that we could no longer ignore. That night, as I finally closed my journal and set the pen aside, I whispered softly to myself, almost as a promise, we cannot ignore it any longer. We will speak, we will face the truth, and only then can we find the way forward. And in that quiet, resolute moment, I understood something essential. Rising conflict is rarely loud or dramatic. Often, it is quiet, insidious, creeping into daily life unnoticed until it can no longer be contained. And yet, it is also an opportunity to confront reality, to examine the depths of our own hearts, and to take the first step toward healing that only honesty can provide. The days that followed were the hardest. The photograph hovered between us like a shadow, unspoken but impossible to ignore. I found myself watching him closely, noticing the smallest gestures, how he avoided my gaze, how he lingered too long on trivial tasks, how his voice seemed distant even when he tried to speak normally. Every interaction carried the weight of the unsaid, the tension of suspicion, the fragility of trust that had been shaken. I tried to act normal, to keep routines intact, to smile and laugh as if nothing had changed. But inside, a storm was building, a quiet, simmering ache that demanded acknowledgement. I knew that pretending wouldn't heal anything. I needed answers. I needed truth. And I knew that without them, our relationship would erode, piece by piece, into something unrecognizable. One evening, I decided I could no longer wait. I asked him to sit with me in the living room. The room felt smaller than usual, the air heavy with anticipation. We need to talk, I said softly, keeping my voice steady but firm. I need to understand everything. He hesitated, fingers fidgeting with the edge of the sofa cushion. I wasn't sure how to tell you, he admitted, his voice almost a whisper. I thought I could explain later, or that it wouldn't matter, but I see now that it does. It matters too much to leave unsaid. The admission was a fragile thread, but it was enough to start unraveling the tension. I leaned forward, heart pounding, emotions swirling, fear, anger, sadness, longing all mixed together. The photograph, I said simply. Tell me the truth. Why was it taken? Why didn't you tell me? He looked away for a long moment, as if searching for courage in the shadows. I thought I was protecting you, he said finally. I thought if you never saw it, you wouldn't have to hurt. But in doing that, I hurt you even more. The words cut through me, not like a scream, but like a slow, steady ache. I felt every missed moment, every lie by omission, every shadow of doubt that had crept into my mind. My chest tightened, my eyes blurred, but I also felt a strange relief that he was finally speaking. Relief that the silence was ending, relief that we were finally facing the truth. I needed to know, I whispered, my voice trembling. I needed to hear it from you. All of it. No more hiding. He nodded, and then he spoke, slowly, carefully, as if each word was a delicate step on fragile ground. I was wrong. I should have told you immediately. I should have trusted you. But I didn't. I let fear guide me instead of honesty. The confession hung in the air, heavy and raw. I wanted to reach out, to bridge the gap, to take back all the hours of worry and doubt. And I realized something essential in that moment. The photograph, as painful as it was, had opened the door to honesty. Without it, we might have continued in quiet tension, letting the distance grow until repair was impossible. We sat together in silence, letting the weight of the moment sink in. No words were needed. The unspoken acknowledgement that trust had been broken, that feelings had been wounded, that love had been tested was enough. It was the calm before a new beginning, fragile but full of possibility. Later that night, I reflected on the path that had led us here. The photograph had been a catalyst, yes, but the rising conflict, the quiet moments of tension, the small actions and reactions, all of it had shaped this turning point. I understood that relationships are delicate. They can fray in silence, in omission, in fear, and yet they can also be repaired with courage, empathy, and honesty. I realized that forgiveness would not be instant. It would not erase the past, but acknowledgement, the willingness to face the truth, to speak openly, and to sit together in the aftermath was the first step toward healing. And that step, small as it seemed, carried more weight than anything else we could do. By the time we went to bed that night, there was still tension, still hurt, but also a fragile sense of hope. The photograph had revealed a truth I hadn't wanted to see, but in seeing it, I understood the depth of human imperfection, the power of honesty, and the possibility of renewal. As I drifted to sleep, I promised myself that the coming days would be about rebuilding, about gentle conversation, about trust earned again, step by step. The rising conflict had reached its peak, but the turning point was imminent, and in that fragile hope, I felt the first warmth of reconciliation stirring. The next morning, sunlight spilled softly through the curtains, casting gentle patterns across the living room. I made a cup of tea and sat down, holding it between my hands, as if the warmth could steady the storm I felt inside. The photograph still lingered in my mind, the memory of seeing it, the questions it raised, the ache it left. He sat across from me, hesitant, avoiding my gaze. I took a deep breath, knowing that the moment I had been dreading and needing had finally arrived. "We need to talk about it," I said softly, my voice calm but firm. "I need to understand everything. Please, no more hiding." He nodded slowly, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence was heavy, but it wasn't hostile. It was the quiet weight of something necessary, of a truth that had been waiting to be acknowledged. Finally, he began, his voice low, careful. I didn't mean for you to see it this way. I thought I was protecting you." "Protecting me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "By hiding the truth, by letting me imagine something worse." He swallowed hard. "I know. I was wrong. I didn't trust that you could handle it, and I wanted to shield you from pain. But I see now, in trying to protect you, I only made things worse." Tears pricked at my eyes. "I don't know if I can forgive this yet," I said honestly. "Not immediately. But I need to hear it, the full story, every detail. No more secrets." He nodded again, and then slowly, piece by piece, he began to explain. He told me why the photograph existed, how it had been taken in a moment he thought would remain private, and how he had wrestled with whether or not to tell me. Each word, each hesitation, revealed the complexity of human emotion, the fear, the regret, the misguided desire to protect. I listened quietly, letting the story unfold. I felt anger, yes, but also empathy. I realized that mistakes are human, and sometimes people act out of fear, not malice. Still, the hurt remained, sharp and raw, because trust had been broken. By the time he finished, the room was quiet again. The sunlight had shifted, falling in softer, warmer patterns across the floor. I felt a strange mix of exhaustion and relief. The revelation had been painful, but it had also lifted the weight of uncertainty. I finally understood not just what had happened, but why it had happened, and how deeply he had struggled with his own conscience. We remained sitting across from each other, the room quiet except for the soft hum of the morning sunlight streaming through the curtains. It felt heavy and light at the same time, a strange contradiction that reflected exactly what I was feeling inside. His words had hung in the air like fragile glass, delicate and sharp, and I didn't want to shatter the moment with premature speech. I needed to breathe, to let my chest expand and contract with the weight of truth, to let it sink in fully, and slowly. A realization began to take shape in my mind, fragile but undeniable. Knowing the truth, even when it hurt, was a gift. It gave me clarity I hadn't felt in weeks. Clarity doesn't always come wrapped in comfort. Sometimes it arrives with the sting of pain, and sometimes it demands a long look at yourself and the people you love. But clarity gave me power, the power to respond, to forgive, to decide what kind of future I wanted for us. "I wish you had trusted me," I finally said, my voice soft, careful, almost a whisper. I looked down at my hands folded in my lap before lifting my gaze to meet his. "I wish you hadn't hidden it, but I also see you were afraid." He swallowed, and for a moment, he didn't speak. I could see the tension in his shoulders, the subtle trembling of his hands resting on his knees. "I was terrified," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "Terrified of losing you, terrified of hurting you, terrified that the consequences would be too much for both of us. I never imagined it would create a distance like this between us." The room felt warmer in that moment, though I knew it was only the weight of emotion rising, mixing with the sunlight that now seemed softer, gentler. I took a slow, deep breath. "Distance isn't something anyone plans," I said quietly. "It grows quietly, subtly, until one day, it's a wall between people who once shared everything. That's what happened to us. He nodded slowly, almost imperceptibly, and in that simple gesture, a silent agreement passed between us. There was no need for elaborate apologies or dramatic gestures. We didn't need to raise our voices. This was not a moment for theatrics or performance. This was a moment for honesty, for acknowledgement, and for the first fragile step toward healing. I don't know if I can forgive you fully yet, I admitted, my throat tight, my voice low. But I want to try. I don't want to lose us over fear and mistakes. I want to find a way back, even if it takes time, even if it's slow. I want to try. Tears welled in his eyes, and I could see the relief there, the relief of having finally spoken the truth, of having opened his heart without fear, of realizing that the first step toward reconciliation had been taken. I felt a strange mixture of tenderness and sorrow, watching the man I loved struggle under the weight of his own mistakes, and at the same time, witnessing the courage it took to finally lay them bare. We stayed in silence for a long while. The silence was heavy, yes, but not oppressive. It was reflective, allowing the emotional intensity to settle into a quiet understanding. It wasn't the end of pain, not by a long shot. The hurt was still there, lingering like an old scar beneath the surface. But for the first time in weeks, I sensed the possibility of something new, a path forward, where honesty, trust, and patience could slowly rebuild what had been broken. Later that evening, after a quiet breakfast and a few hours of shared tasks around the house, we decided to take a small walk around the garden. The air was cool and crisp, scented faintly with the earthiness of soil and the subtle sweetness of flowers just beginning to bloom. We walked slowly, side by side, not speaking much. Words weren't necessary. The simple act of moving forward together, step by step, symbolized something important. Even after betrayal, even after secrets, people could choose to face the future together. The garden was alive with subtle movements. Leaves trembled in the wind, birds called quietly from hidden branches, and somewhere in the distance, the faint sound of a neighbor's radio drifted across the air. I noticed details I had overlooked before: the curve of the stone path, the small patches of sunlight that glimmered on the flower petals, the texture of the grass beneath our shoes, and I realized, as I walked beside him, that life continued, even after hurt, even after betrayal. Life moved forward, and so could we, if we chose to. When we returned inside, I felt a subtle lightness in my chest. The photograph, once a symbol of pain and hidden truths, now felt like a marker on the path we had begun to walk. It would always be a memory of betrayal, yes, but it had also been the spark that ignited a necessary confrontation, the catalyst that brought truth to the surface. Without it, we might have continued in quiet tension, letting the rift grow until reconciliation seemed impossible. That as I prepared for bed that night, I reflected on the day's events. The revelation had been painful, yes, and it had brought tears, heartache, and doubt, but it had also been necessary. I understood something I had only begun to grasp fully in those hours. Relationships are fragile. They can fracture in silence, in omission, in fear. They can fracture in small, almost invisible ways, until suddenly, one day, there is a wall where once there was connection. But relationships can also mend. They can heal when courage, honesty, and empathy are present, when people allow themselves to be vulnerable, when they choose to see each other's humanity. Trust can be rebuilt, slowly but surely. I promised myself that the coming days, weeks, and months would be about gentle conversation, careful patience, and the deliberate act of restoring trust. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about all the moments that had led to this point, the silences, the misunderstandings, the small acts of avoidance that had grown into distance. I thought about how easily a relationship could be fractured and how much courage it took to repair it. And I felt a quiet hope, fragile but genuine, that our shared commitment to honesty and understanding would allow us to rebuild what had been strained. I knew the turning point had begun, sparked by a photograph, by truth, and by the willingness to confront pain rather than hide from it. And I understood that this was just the beginning. There would be days when old wounds felt heavy again, when patience would be tested, when fear might creep back. But now, there was a foundation, however tentative, on which to stand, a foundation built not on perfection, but on honesty, mutual respect, and the shared desire to move forward together. Before sleep claimed me, I whispered softly, almost to myself, "We can do this. We will take it step by step. And one day, perhaps, the photograph will no longer remind us of betrayal, but of courage, of truth, and of the moment we chose to face each other honestly. The night was still, the house was quiet, and for the first time in what felt like a very long while, I felt peace, not complete, not absolute, but a gentle, enduring sense of hope that the next day, and the days after, would bring us closer, instead of pushing us further apart. After that evening, a quiet tension remained in the house. It wasn't the heavy, suffocating weight of before, the kind that made every glance and gesture feel like a test. No, this was subtler, fragile, delicate, like walking on thin ice, aware that any wrong move could crack it. I knew that if there was to be any hope of healing, I had to speak openly. The photograph had already opened a door, a crack through which honesty could enter, and now it was up to both of us to step through, to meet the truth head on. The next morning, I found him in the living room. The early sunlight poured through the windows, soft and golden, painting quiet lines across his face. He sat in his usual chair, hands clasped loosely in his lap, staring at the floor as though the world beyond those walls did not exist. There was a tension in him, yes, but it was no longer defensive or guarded. It was heavy with regret, and perhaps, I realized, with longing for resolution. I settled into the chair across from him, careful not to disturb the fragile calm that had settled between us. My heart raced, but I spoke first, as gently as I could. "I need to say what I feel," I began. My voice was soft, measured, but firm. "I can't just let this go without understanding, without saying the things I need to say." He lifted his gaze slowly, meeting mine. There was a flicker of vulnerability there I hadn't seen before, and I felt my own chest tighten. He nodded, as though preparing himself for the storm of words I was about to release, ready to listen, ready to face the consequences of his actions, and perhaps, to finally make things right. "I felt betrayed," I said slowly, each word deliberate. "Not because you made a mistake, but because I wasn't included, because you made a decision for me, without me. It hurt. It made me feel invisible in my own life." His eyes glistened with unshed tears, and his voice wavered when he spoke. "I know. And I am so sorry. I thought I was protecting you. I thought if I shielded you from the truth, you would be happier. But I see now, I only hurt you more." His words were heavy, laden with sincerity. I realized in that moment that the confrontation wasn't about anger, it wasn't about blaming him. It was about truth, about finally bringing to light the emotions that had simmered quietly for weeks. It was about acknowledging the hurt and fear, the regret and uncertainty, that both of us had carried silently. "I need to hear everything," I said, taking a deep, steadying breath. "Every reason, every thought, every moment you decided to hide this from me. No more half-truths. I need to understand, even if it hurts." He nodded again, swallowing hard, and began to speak slowly, carefully. His words were deliberate, chosen with the weight of their importance in mind. He explained why the photograph existed, why it had been taken, why he had thought secrecy was necessary. He spoke of fear of my reaction, fear of judgment, fear of what would happen if the truth were revealed too soon. He spoke of his own insecurities, the anxiety that had guided his choices, the misguided belief that withholding information could somehow protect both of us. As I listened, I felt a flood of emotions: anger, yes, but tempered by sadness, hurt, but now softened by empathy. I began to understand him, not in excuse, but in recognition of the human flaws we all carry. His intentions, though flawed, had never been cruel. They had been human. I could see now the internal conflict he had carried silently, the weight he had borne without sharing. "When I saw the photograph," I said quietly, my voice trembling just slightly, "I didn't know what to think. I felt betrayed, but I also felt afraid. Afraid of losing you, afraid of losing everything we had built together." He reached across the table and took my hand, tentative at first, then firmer. The simple act of touch carried more meaning than words ever could. It was a silent acknowledgement of our shared pain, mutual regret, and the unspoken desire to rebuild what had been broken. "I never wanted you to feel that way," he murmured, voice low and shaky. "If I could take it back, I would, but I can't. All I can do is be honest now, and hope that it's enough to start healing." "I don't know if it's enough yet," I admitted. "The hurt is still here, lingering, but I want to try. I want to find a way forward. I want us to move past this, together." We stayed like that for a long time, holding hands across the small living room table. Neither of us spoke. The silence was not uncomfortable. It was reflective, a space for the emotions of the morning to settle, for understanding to sink in. the sunlight shifted across the floor, slow and gentle, as though the house itself had paused to witness our fragile moment of honesty. Finally, he spoke again. I know I can't erase the past. I can't undo what you felt when you saw that photograph, but I promise I will do everything I can to earn back your trust. Every day, step by step. I nodded, tears silently rolling down my cheeks, and I will try to open my heart to let you in again. But it will take time. Trust isn't rebuilt in a single day. For the first time since the photograph, I felt a sense of possibility. The confrontation had not erased the hurt, but it had surfaced the truth. It allowed us to finally name the pain, acknowledge the fear, and take the first tentative steps toward healing. We spent hours untangling the web of misunderstanding, fear, and regret. Each word, each confession, each pause became a chance to see the other's perspective, to recognize the humanity behind the mistakes. It became clear that confrontation, when approached with calm and honesty, could serve as a bridge rather than a wall. By evening, the air in the living room felt lighter. The photograph still existed, but it no longer carried the same crushing weight of betrayal. Instead, it had become a symbol of courage, the courage to face the truth, to confront discomfort, and to begin rebuilding what had been strained. Before leaving the room, he stood and drew me into a long, quiet hug. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't theatrical, it was real. It was an unspoken promise, a commitment to face the future together with patience, with honesty, and with love. That night, I reflected quietly on what had occurred. The confrontation had been difficult, yes, even painful, but it had been necessary. It cleared the air, created space for understanding, and opened a pathway toward forgiveness. I understood more clearly than ever that relationships are delicate, shaped by trust, nurtured by openness, and strengthened by vulnerability. They can fracture silently in the shadows of fear, but they can also mend when truth is shared and hearts are willing. From that night onward, we made small, intentional changes. Gentle conversations replaced silence. Acts of care replaced withdrawal. Acknowledgement of feelings replaced avoidance. Each step was deliberate, a quiet gesture toward rebuilding what had been lost. Though the past could never be erased, the confrontation had made it possible for the future to be different, for trust to be restored. Slowly but surely, in the spaces between our shared words and gestures. Over the next days, the subtle shifts began to accumulate. We started sitting together for breakfast, sharing tea and light conversation. We began walking in the garden together, noticing the growth of plants we had planted years ago, commenting on the flowers, the colors, the sunlight. These moments, though ordinary, were extraordinary in their significance. They were tangible evidence that the walls of fear and misunderstanding were slowly crumbling. We revisited old routines, finding comfort in the familiar. Folding laundry together became more than a chore. It became a chance to talk, to laugh, and to quietly support one another. Cooking meals together brought us closer, not because of the food, but because of the act itself, the shared effort, the opportunity to collaborate, the simple joy of presence. Each small act reinforced our connection, brick by brick, moment by moment. In the evenings, we would sometimes sit together in silence, the soft glow of lamps casting a warm light across the room. It was in these moments that reflection came naturally. I realized that the confrontation had been a turning point, not because of the words exchanged alone, but because it allowed us to confront ourselves, to see our own flaws, our own fears, and our own capacity for understanding. The road ahead was still long. Doubts lingered. Moments of insecurity would creep in, but now they were tempered by a foundation of honesty, empathy, and a renewed commitment to each other. The photograph remained, but it no longer haunted us. It was a reminder of the day we chose courage over avoidance, truth over silence, and the first steps of healing over continued distance. After the confrontation, a quiet shift began to settle over our relationship. It wasn't sudden or dramatic, it was subtle, like the first light of dawn touching the horizon after a long night. The heavy weight of mistrust, the silent tension that had hovered for weeks, began to soften. Each day brought small opportunities for connection, tiny gestures that felt monumental because they were built on honesty and courage. We started with small things. Conversations that had been guarded became a little more open. Simple questions about daily life, how the other had slept, what had been eaten for breakfast, turned into real moments of presence. And in those moments, I began to notice something I hadn't realized. I had been missing her voice, her laughter, the easy way we once shared our lives. One afternoon, she asked me to help her organize some old photographs. It was a quiet request, but it felt significant, almost symbolic. As we sat at the kitchen table, flipping through faded images, I felt warmth spreading in my chest. Each photograph was a memory, a story, a piece of our shared history, and as we spoke of the moments captured in the pictures, I realized how much of our bond we had allowed to be overshadowed by silence and fear. "Do you remember this day?" she asked, holding up a picture of the two of us baking cookies as children. Flour covered our hands and faces, and we were laughing uncontrollably. I smiled, laughing softly. "I do. You insisted on stirring the batter yourself, and then managed to spill half of it on the floor." She giggled, the sound light and familiar. "I was trying to be independent. I didn't mean to make a mess, just like I didn't mean to push you away now." Her words carried honesty and vulnerability. And I realized then that reconciliation isn't about pretending the past didn't hurt. It's about acknowledging the pain, understanding it, and choosing to move forward. Each shared memory, each gentle confession, became a brick in rebuilding our connection. We began to find comfort in small routines again. Preparing meals together became more than a necessity, became a shared ritual, an opportunity to communicate without words, to support each other in quiet ways. Folding laundry, watering the plants, washing dishes, these simple tasks became moments of togetherness, reminders that family is built in presence, in care, in attention, not in grand gestures or material possessions. Sometimes, late at night, I would reflect on how fragile our bond had seemed just days before. I remembered the fear I had felt, the uncertainty about whether our relationship could survive the tension that had grown like ivy between us. And yet, here we were, gently rebuilding what had been strained, discovering that love, even when tested, has a remarkable ability to find its way back. We also began to address practical matters together. Decisions about finances, about the home, about family responsibilities, things that had once caused friction were now approached as shared choices. She sought my input, and I learned to voice my thoughts calmly, without fear of judgment. The act of inclusion itself became healing. Every choice made together was an affirmation of trust, a small but significant gesture that reminded us both of the value of partnership and mutual respect. One evening, as the sun dipped low, casting golden light across the living room, we sat quietly, sipping tea. She reached over and touched my hand, lightly, tentatively. "I'm grateful," she said softly, "for your patience, for not giving up on me, for letting me be part of this again." I felt tears prick my eyes. "I'm grateful too," I said, my voice trembling slightly, "for this chance to rebuild, to move forward together. Every moment now feels precious, because I know how easily it could have been lost." It was in these moments, in the quiet and the calm, that I realized something profound. Forgiveness and trust aren't instantaneous. They are cultivated through patience, through honesty, through shared experiences. They grow slowly, nurtured by consistency, and strengthened by the willingness to be vulnerable. Over time, the small acts of care accumulated into something more enduring. We laughed together again, shared stories that had been tucked away, and even began to plan small outings, moments to create new memories alongside the old. The photograph, once a source of pain and betrayal, now served as a reminder of the turning point, the moment when we chose honesty over avoidance, connection over distance. One day, she looked at me thoughtfully and said, "I know it won't always be easy, but I feel lighter, more open, like we can face anything together now." I nodded, feeling warmth fill me. "Yes, we have a long road, but each step we take makes the path a little clearer, and each step brings us closer, not just to each other, but to understanding and trust that we both need." Even when disagreements arose, they were gentler now, tempered by the foundation of honesty and empathy we had rebuilt. Conversations that might have escalated before were now approached with patience. With an awareness of the fragility and the value of our relationship, we learned to pause, to listen, to acknowledge feelings before reacting. The change wasn't dramatic, but it was profound. Our home felt different. The laughter returned. The quiet moments of shared life, tea at the table, tending the garden, arranging flowers became treasured rituals, and through it all, I discovered that love isn't about never being hurt. It's about choosing, every day, to continue caring, to continue trusting, to continue sharing life, even after mistakes and misunderstandings. I realized that rebuilding trust is like tending a garden. It requires patience, attention, and care. We must pull the weeds of doubt, water the seeds of honesty, and give space for growth. And over time, the garden flourishes not perfectly, not without moments of challenge, but with resilience, beauty, and life that thrives despite the hardships it has endured. As the days turned into weeks, our connection deepened. The tension that had once felt so permanent now seemed like a distant memory, softened by understanding and presence. We laughed more freely, shared more openly, and began to recognize the value of honesty over pride. Every conversation became a quiet act of healing. Every small gesture a reaffirmation of our bond. One rainy afternoon, we sat together in the living room, listening to the soft patter of rain against the windows. She held a cup of tea, wrapped in both hands, and looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen in months, a mixture of apology, gratitude, and cautious hope. "I've been thinking," she said softly, "about all the time we lost, about how my fear and stubbornness pushed you away. I didn't see it then, but I see it now. I see how much pain I caused you." I reached across and took her hand. It hurt, yes, but we are here now, and that's what matters. What we had and what we are rebuilding is stronger because we faced it together. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I've realized something," she continued. "Forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about acknowledging the hurt, feeling it, and then choosing to let it go. I want us to move forward without carrying the weight of the past." I nodded, my heart swelling. "I forgive you," I said quietly, "not because it erases what happened, but because I want us to grow, because I don't want this pain to define us. I want love to define us." Tears slipped silently down her cheeks, and I felt my own fall as well. It wasn't dramatic or loud. It was tender, subtle, and profoundly moving. In that moment, forgiveness became a bridge, connecting to hearts that had been fractured by fear, pride, and misunderstanding. We spent hours that day talking not about the will, not about what was fair, not about what had caused the rift, but about us, about our childhood, about the dreams we had shared, about the laughter that had once filled our home. Each story we recalled, each memory we shared, became a brick in rebuilding the foundation of our relationship. "I've missed this," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I missed being able to talk to you, to share, to laugh, even to argue, knowing it didn't mean we were breaking apart." "I missed it too," I said, holding her gaze. "Even the small things, like our silly fights over chores, or who got to pick the movie. I missed everything." It was in the quiet, reflective moments that I realized how fragile trust can be, yet how resilient it is when nurtured. Forgiveness, I understood, is not a one-time act. It is a practice, a daily choice, a conscious decision to see beyond the hurt and recognize the value of the relationship itself. Over the next few weeks, we created new rituals, simple acts: making breakfast together, watering the plants, folding laundry side by side became opportunities for connection. Even small gestures, like passing the salt at the dinner table or asking about the other's day, carried significance. These were not dramatic declarations of reconciliation. They were quiet affirmations of presence, care, and trust. We also faced practical matters together, decisions about family, about finances, about the home. Things that had once sparked arguments were now approached as shared responsibilities. We listened to each other, considered each perspective, and made choices together. The act of inclusion itself became a form of healing. Every shared decision was an acknowledgement of trust, a small but meaningful step toward unity. One evening, as the sun set, casting a soft glow across the living room, she turned to me and said, "I feel like we are finally moving forward, like the past is still there, but it doesn't control us anymore. I feel lighter." I smiled, warmth flooding my chest. "Yes, we've been through the storm, but now we are learning to sail together. The wind may still be strong at times, but we have the strength and patience to navigate it." It was also during these days that I noticed subtle changes in the way we communicated. Words were chosen with care, tones were softer, and we allowed pauses to linger without discomfort. Arguments that might have escalated before were now handled with empathy. We learned to listen first, to respond later, to acknowledge feelings without judgment. Even the photograph that had sparked the pain became a symbol not of betrayal, but of growth. We placed it carefully on the mantel, where it could be seen but no longer dominate our emotions. It reminded us of the turning point, of the moment we chose honesty over avoidance, connection over distance. It reminded us that even painful truths can lead to deeper understanding when faced with courage and compassion. Sometimes, late at night, I would reflect on the journey. I thought of the anger I had felt, the betrayal, the heartache, and I realized something important. Forgiveness is not a gift given only to the other person. It is a gift to oneself. It frees the heart, allows peace to enter, and makes space for love to grow again. I also learned that reconciliation does not mean perfection. There will always be moments of misunderstanding, moments of tension, moments when pride might tempt one to retreat. But what matters is the willingness to continue trying, the choice to keep showing up, to keep caring, to keep trusting. One rainy afternoon, as we shared a quiet cup of tea by the window, she said, "I know we can't go back and change the past, but I feel like we can build a future that is better, stronger, and more honest." I nodded, feeling tears of gratitude well up. "Yes," I whispered, "and it starts with each day, each choice, each moment we spend together." From that day forward, our home felt different. The warmth of connection returned, slowly but surely. Laughter returned to our rooms. Shared routines became cherished rituals, and through it all, I discovered a profound truth. Love is resilient. It survives fear, pride, and misunderstanding. It thrives when we choose patience, empathy, and presence. Forgiveness and emotional closure became not just abstract concepts, but lived experiences. They were visible in the soft smiles exchanged across the room, in the gentle touches, in the shared quiet moments that needed no words. They were reflected in the way we planned our days together, in the way we approached family, in the way we acknowledged the past while embracing the present. It was not a grand, cinematic reconciliation. There were no dramatic confrontations, no public apologies, no declarations to the world. It was quiet, intimate, heartfelt, a real and lasting change born from honesty, courage, and love. And in that quiet, reflective space, I understood that this journey through pain, through hurt, through betrayal, had taught us both something invaluable. We had learned that family, at its core, is not about perfection, or fairness, or possessions. It is about showing up, being present, and choosing connection even when it is hard. It is about forgiveness, patience, and the willingness to love despite the scars. The bond we rebuilt was not fragile. It was resilient. Tested by adversity, it had emerged stronger, deeper, and more meaningful than before. We were no longer two people divided by misunderstanding. We were two hearts aligned in trust, empathy, and mutual care. As time went on, life returned to a gentle rhythm. The days were filled with simple moments, shared meals, quiet conversations, and the soft comfort of knowing we were no longer distant. The pain of the past, though never forgotten, had been softened by understanding and love. We had learned that the heart remembers, but it also heals, if we allow it. I often found myself reflecting on that photograph, the one that had once felt like a wound in my chest. Now, it felt different. It was a reminder, not of betrayal, but of growth. It reminded me that sometimes, the things that hurt us most can teach us the deepest lessons, if we are willing to face them honestly and with an open heart. One evening, as we sat together watching the sunset through the window, she reached for my hand. "I'm grateful," she said softly, her voice steady and warm, "for the patience, the forgiveness, and for choosing to stay even when it was hard." I squeezed her hand gently, feeling the weight of those words. "I'm grateful too," I replied, "for the chance to rebuild, to reconnect, and for the love that never truly left us." It was in that quiet moment that I realized something profound. Forgiveness is not a single act. It is a daily choice, a practice of compassion, and a willingness to see beyond the mistakes to the person we care about. It is a gift we give, not just to others, but to ourselves. By letting go of anger and fear, we make space for peace, understanding, and deeper connection. Looking back, I understood that love is not defined by the absence of conflict. It is defined by the courage to face challenges together, to stay present when it is easier to walk away, and to trust that the bond we share is stronger than any misunderstanding. True connection, I realized, survives even when tested, grows even when strained, and flourishes when nurtured with patience and care. Our home felt lighter now, filled with laughter and conversation. Even the mundane tasks, washing dishes, folding laundry, watering plants, became small acts of togetherness. Every shared smile, every gentle word, and every simple gesture carried meaning. They reminded us that family is not about perfection or fairness. It is about showing up, being present, and choosing love each day. Even when it is quiet and subtle, I learned that life is too short to carry grudges. Pain, betrayal, and hurt may visit us, but they do not have to define us. We can choose forgiveness, we can choose empathy, and we can choose to rebuild what has been broken. And in doing so, we discover the enduring power of love, the quiet strength of connection, and the gentle beauty of reconciliation. As I closed this story, I hope you remember this: the moments that challenge us, that test our patience and our hearts, also have the power to teach us resilience, compassion, and the value of human connection. It is never too late to reach out, to speak, to forgive, and to cherish the ones who matter most. Even after the hurt, after the misunderstandings, after the tears, love can find its way back. And when it does, it is stronger, calmer, and infinitely more precious than before. Because family is not perfect, but it is worth every effort, every choice to forgive, every quiet moment of understanding. And sometimes, it is the smallest gestures, the soft words, the shared tea, the gentle hand on a shoulder that carry the deepest meaning. In the end, that is what remains. Not the photograph that once caused pain, not the moments of anger or hurt, but the love that endured, the love that healed, the love that reminded us, quietly, that no matter the trials we face, hearts willing to forgive and connect can always find a way home.